everyone, and welcome to SUNUP. I'm Lyndall Stout. We hope you and your family are doing well. As for us, we are continuing to bring you information about production agriculture from OSU at a safe distance, of course, beginning today with an update on winter crops and possible impact from this week's late freeze.
So when we have a lot of winter crops out, we always are really concerned. Oklahomans are very familiar with the April freeze, and once again, this was a year to where we had it. And with a lot of our winter crops, we looked pretty good. We were in a really good situation, and that freeze kind of potentially caught us a little off guard. We see in just a couple of days, we see some of this canola plant have started to show the symptoms of the freeze. This right here, this bending of the raceme or this flowering structure is something we'll typically get within the first 24 hours. The thing you want to see is it recover. And usually within 24 to 48 hours, we'll see this kind of perk back up, recover, and it'll go on about its day. So something like this looks really bad from the turn row because it looks like everything's drooped down, things are really bad, and then the day later you come out and it looks fine. This is the one that we don't want to see, and what we've seen is this whole flower cluster is essentially got froze and is pretty much dead. All of these little flowers up here are dead, probably won't successfully pollinate. It and a lot of the little bud pods up here probably won't make any seed. However, the one thing we always like about canola, those late freezes, it can handle and it can recover a lot better than some, things like wheat, because we do have that primary tiller. With canola, we have all these branches that can make up a substantial amount of yield and still produce a good crop.
Let's talk about wheat for just a minute. Some areas of the state did even see a little bit of snow or a little bit of actual moisture on the plants, of course. What are you hearing there?
Well, we always like to see moisture. When we get a really cold situation, we like to see that moisture because as long as it doesn't physically damage the crop, it does serve as some degree of insulation. Dr. De Silva actually put out a really great blog post this last week talking about wheat and wheat damage and how to scout for wheat damage. So I'll always refer our wheat producers to go look at her blog. It's a really nice blog, kind of walks through the steps on when you could see it. Overall, unless we see a substantial stuff, I like where the spot where the wheat was going into the freeze. I really like where the canola was going into the freeze. And I think we should still be pretty good on a lot of our winter crops that are out there. They were already looking so good. I hope they can continue to look that good as well.
No doubt you're getting questions from around the state from producers who are concerned about a number of things. What kind of things are you hearing?
Yeah, I think the number one question I'm getting right now is when should I start planting? And the answer to that is we're just typically on the front edge. Now, if we're looking at corn, we're probably a little bit on the back edge of corn from a getting it in and out before the really big heat comes on. But from a standpoint of things like sorghum, soybean, even sesame, we're either right on the edge or we haven't even got to those planting areas. But yeah, we're still at that very beginning of that window to go do it. So put the mind at ease for a little bit. We still could be in a rough situation in 2 to 3 weeks, but right now we're in a really good condition to get summer crops in.
Okay, thanks a lot, Josh. For a link to your county offices and a link to the blog that Josh mentioned, just go to sunup.okstate.edu.
Hi, Wes Lee with your weekly Mesonet weather report. April has been a sharp contrast to a very warm March. On Wednesday, a large swath of Oklahoma experienced what is hopefully the last freeze event for the spring. Temperatures were as low as 19 degrees in Kenton. Only portions of the northeast and the far southeast escaped the freeze event. This cold front that arrived on Easter and lingered through the first half of the week dropped soil temperatures dramatically. This map shows actual soil temperatures at 4 inches under sod for 9 a.m. on Wednesday. The blue color that dominates 3/4 of the state shows temperatures were mainly from the mid-40s to the low 50s. Looking back 1 week ago at the same time, we see soil temperatures were more favorable to planting summer crops, being in the high 50s and low 60s. If we look at just one Mesonet station, we get an idea of how dramatic that change was. This graph shows Chickasha's soil temperatures over a 7-day period. The green lines are the temps at 2 and 4 inches under sod, which dropped about 10 degrees. The brown line is the soil temps at 4 inches under bare soil. It dropped by as much as 40 degrees from the highest to the lowest reading. I'm always amazed at the insulating effect of ground covers. Now here's Gary with rain and drought information.
Thanks, Wes, and good morning, everyone. Well, with everything else we have going on, we had an unwelcome visitor this past week in the form of winter. We did have a significant freeze over much of the state, but we also have drought to contend with. Let's get right to that new drought monitor map. Conditions in the far western panhandle continue to deteriorate. We still have the same picture as last week, but we did get drier out in that area. And the Mesonet's consecutive days with less than a quarter inch of rainfall map does show those dire conditions out across the western panhandle. We see now more than 110 days without at least a quarter inch of rainfall in any single day, and also above 50 days without a quarter inch. Now, speaking of that winter weather, we do see from this hours below freezing map from the Mesonet, this is for basically Sunday morning through Wednesday afternoon. We see out in the western panhandle, in those areas that are impacted by drought, 40 to 50 hours below freezing in that area. That decreases as we go to the northwest, but in general, almost the entire state saw a freeze over that 3-day cold snap. Now, for the more significant freeze, if we go down to hours below 28 degrees, we do see, again, the western panhandle 20 to more than 30 hours below 28 degrees over that 3-day period. And then it's scattered across the state, especially across the northwestern and western parts of the state. We do see increased odds for above normal temperatures across most of the state, but especially out across the panhandle and the western half of Oklahoma. So hopefully we get some warmer weather in here and alleviate some of that freeze damage that we could be seeing if that cold weather had continued. So the freeze damage might not show up for a while, but we do need rainfall out there across the western panhandle, where they've gone a long time without significant rainfall, to give those folks some help, and the rest of the state does need some rain. That's it for this time. We'll see you next time on the Mesonet Weather Report.
In the news recently, we've been hearing of plants closing across the country, and Derrell, just let's dive in. What's happening with that?
Well, you know, across the meat industry, beef and pork especially, a little bit in poultry. Obviously, the coronavirus has hit the workforce there. This has been one of our biggest fears for the last several weeks, and it's certainly coming out now. So we've got at least one mainline beef plant down, another smaller plant that's down right now, and I think there's some impacts in a couple of other plants now where they're restricting production, if not totally shut down.
How many processing plants are there across the country in general?
Well, there's about 6 of the big mainline fed cattle slaughter plants. There's another probably 6 or 8 smaller plants that do largely cow. Some of them do some mix of fed cattle and cows.
With the potential of 1 or 2 of these shutting down, will this impact the consumers?
Well, it depends on how it happens. If it's, one plant or reduced capacity that maybe adds up to one plant, we can probably work through that without too much disruption. It's going to depend a little bit on where it happens and so on. The local effects could be a little bit different. But the fear here and the risk here is that we have multiple plants go down or get seriously cut back at one time. Then we could actually have some significant disruptions in the flow of fresh meat into the consumer side.
As part of that, do you foresee a run on meat?
Well, I think what consumers are going to see is kind of a continuation of what they've been seeing, but for different reasons. We've had issues since this whole thing started about a month ago with the loss of sort of half of our marketing channel, the food service side. We've had the logistics and the bottlenecks that and the surge in consumer demand at the grocery side that created shortages there. And we've sort of worked through some of the bottlenecks. They're still there, but now we add to it maybe a real decrease in production, so the consumers may continue to see some shortages at that level.
What should cattle producers across Oklahoma and the Southern Great Plains expect?
Well, again, I think we're expecting these to be impacts that hopefully are not too long-lived, so I think producers are looking for flexibility. The great thing about the beef industry is we have more capability to be flexible compared to, say, pork and poultry. So, you know, it's not fun and it will be expensive and somewhat costly, but at the same time, we do have the ability to make more adjustments and it may affect everybody in the industry.
When producers are managing through this time, do you see that prices could start to rise again later?
At some point in time, obviously, we would expect to see some recovery in this. You know, there'll be changes in the timing of things and a lot of unknowns going forward. Obviously, the macroeconomy becomes very important in the second half of the year, but in general, yes, we would look for some recovery.
Okay, thank you very much. Dr. Derrell Peel, Livestock Marketing Specialist here at Oklahoma State University.
We're here with our Extension Beef Cattle Specialist, Paul Beck. And Paul, right now, producers are kind of moving their cattle off of wheat, off of pasture and bringing them in. But in these kind of uncertain times with coronavirus, you've had a lot of questions come to you about what they should do with their cattle.
Yes, the timing of the market break having to do with the coronavirus really coincided when a lot of producers would pull cattle from wheat pasture and for a dual purpose crop. This year, a lot of people decided to keep cattle over onto graze out wheat. I've had a lot of questions about keeping cattle longer, keeping cattle, you know, further or downstream into the marketing system. We've lost a lot of value in these cattle, and people just wondering what to do. And you know, producers that have developed their cow herds and been using really good bulls, they do have the potential to own these cattle into the feed yard. It's added risk. It's something that a lot of people aren't used to doing, but they can capture some value from these really high quality cattle like we have here.
Well, let's talk a little bit about some of those risks that producers might have to consider if they are going to use that option.
On the average, when these cattle are entering the feed yard weighing about 760, they're taking about 175 days on feed. They're gaining about 3.75 pounds a day. It's taking about 6.5 pounds of feed per pound of gain. At those numbers, with the cost of feed that we're looking at now in the feedlots, that's about an 80 cent per pound cost of gain. So the risk on these cattle is if they cost more to gain than that, or, you know, will they do better than that? We have just shipped out a load of cattle, ranch cattle from some producers that have been doing a really good job selecting bulls for growth and carcass. And, you know, those steers gained right at 4.2 pounds a day. They took 5.8 pounds of feed per pound of gain, and their cost of gain was right at 74 cents per pound. When they slaughtered those cattle, where right now the average choice is about 73% choice on these cattle, their cattle were 88% choice and 12% select, but of that 88% that were choice, there were 28% of the total population that were premium choice, or that would go for certified Angus beef type programs. So, you know, those types of cattle, where right now the fat cattle or fed cattle cash market is at $1 and a nickel, last week's average price, using the grid and based on their quality, yield grade and marbling, they on a live basis penciled out to be right at $1.26. So added about $200 to $300 in value because their cattle did perform, they did gain well, but they're also very good on at the packing plan.
All right, thanks, Paul.
All right, thank you.
Paul Beck, Extension Beef Cattle Specialist here at Oklahoma State University.
We're only just a few weeks away from the start of the spring breeding season, which here in Oklahoma generally starts around the 1st of May, so that we're done with the breeding season by the end of June. Because heat stress can have such an impact on breeding performance of beef cattle that I think it's important that we remind ourselves that we need to get that breeding season completed as much as we possibly can before those July, August, early September high pressure heat domes settle in on us and cause some real stress on our cattle. You see, heat stress can have an effect on reproduction in a couple of ways. Right at the time of breeding or insemination, we know from large databases from dairy herds that any increase in body temperature of these cows right at the time of insemination can reduce pregnancy rates by a few percentage points. In one study, it indicated that if the cow's body temperature was increased only by 0.9 degrees Fahrenheit, they lost about 13% on the conception rates on the day of insemination. If the heat stress occurred the next day, it wasn't quite as dramatic, but about a 7% loss in conception rates. And that's just at the time of breeding. You want to remember, that's only the female side of the story at the time of breeding. We want to remember that males also, if they're heat stressed, we have seen lowered sperm quality, lowered semen quality, and therefore lowered fertility from the bulls. And when you multiply those two things together, it becomes a rather substantial loss in pregnancy percentages. Keep that in mind. It'll help us get a better calf crop each year and therefore help our bottom line. Hey, we'll look forward to visiting with you again next week on SUNUP's Cow-Calf Corner.
As things green up across Oklahoma, you may think that the forage quality is greening up too. Dave, is there much truth to that?
Well, it's definitely greening up and a lot better than the brown stuff those cows have been consuming all winter. But you'd be surprised there's not as much green dry matter there as you might expect. Kind of a standard or average sized cow that's before she calves might need about 28 pounds plus or minus of forage dry matter, feed dry matter. Lactating cow, a lot of those cows have already calved this spring. They're going to need more like 35 pounds of forage and feed dry matter total.
We may think that that is a great opportunity for those cattle to consume that. How much are they actually getting?
Well, that's a good question because, you know, dry matter content is extremely variable. This time of year it's low, it's lush. People refer to it as washy forage, and that's true because there's a lot of water in it. You know, your harvested grass hay is generally going to contain somewhere around 15 to 10% moisture, so it'll be 85 to 90% dry matter. But this forage, the cool season forage like cheat grass and fescue, for example, this time of year is going to be the opposite end of that spectrum. The fresh forage will be somewhere in the neighborhood of, you know, 80 or upwards of 85% water and only 15, 20, 25% dry matter.
How would a producer go about determining how much dry matter there is?
Yeah, well, so that's a pretty simple thing to do, and I thought I'd bring my little props here and just kind of go do a real quick little demonstration this morning. But if you've got a microwave oven, an inexpensive kind of a food scale, and this is probably about a $10 version. You can buy a lot nicer one for $20.
Right.
But you know, this little system would apply to harvesting hay in the summertime, as well as we're looking at the moisture content of this fresh forage. But the principle of how to go about it applies a lot throughout the year. So anyway, really all you need to do is go graze, harvest about somewhere around at least 100 grams of forage, and that's going to wind up being a whole lot more than you think, because you know it's fluffy. And so, just as an example, I've got it on my cardboard here because it's going to give me a lot of surface area to put on my little scale.
Right.
But once of course, you weigh your cardboard first, write the number down, put your pile of forage on there, and I'm hoping that's right around 100 grams. And in fact, it is. I measured, I weighed it earlier. And then I'm going to scoot that off into my microwavable blue plate. We'll call this session the Blue Plate Special.
I like it.
So anyway, you gather that up, try not to drop any pieces of forage, pop it in your microwave, set it on 4 minutes on high, and just let it dry.
Okay.
Okay, at the end of 4 minutes, you'd pull it out, slide it back onto the cardboard, weigh it again, write that number down.
Okay.
Okay, now once you get that done, you're going to put it back on the blue plate, back to the microwave for another 2 minutes.
2 minutes. Okay.
Okay, now this time the forage is going to start to get dry.
Okay.
And so you probably ought to go ahead and put a cup of water in the microwave with the blue plate
To prevent the smoke.
to prevent it from burning,
Yeah.
right? And it works awesome.
Yeah.
So, and then let it go for two more minutes, pull it out, weigh it yet again, and write the number down. And if when the number stops dropping, it's dry. So this pile of forage here, this is the dried, this is fescue, by the way.
Oh, okay.
This is the dried version of it. And it wound up, this is about 100 grams of wet forage. Dried, that weighs about 20 grams.
Wow.
So this is 20% forage dry matter, 80% moisture.
Okay, thank you very much, Dr. Dave Lalman,
Yes, sir.
Beef Cattle Nutrition Specialist here at Oklahoma State University.
Kim Anderson, our crop marketing specialist, joins us now. Kim, start things off with telling us how things are going in the grain markets.
Well, there's a lot going on in the markets right now, and as one analyst said, it's about oil. Oil's a big factor. Oil prices extremely low, oil demand low. I mean, it's got the whole economy. And then oil prices impact corn prices and ethanol prices, and wheat prices are connected to corn prices to a certain degree, because that's with cheap corn, you're not going to feed as much wheat. Then you got the index of the U.S. dollar. You know, that the value of the dollar in the last few months has increased from about 96 to 104. That's an 8% increase in the price of our products going on the export market. Now it's fallen off around 4 points, so it's a little lower now, but it's still relatively high. And then you've got the crop conditions getting to the actual what's going on. You're planting corn planting started. You got the wheat crop conditions, that's relatively good shape. And then you've got wheat plantings, spring wheat coming up in the U.S. They're planting wheat in Australia now. They're looking at having a crop for the first time in 3 years in Australia. So you've got that coming on. And then you've got the crop conditions in the European Union and around the world. So there's just a lot going on in the markets right now.
Do any of these price movements and things that you're watching give us any indication of what the future may hold in terms of prices?
Well, there's a lot of, I mean, you take the three main things, oil, COVID-19, you take the dollar index, all those are not really related to wheat. They create risk, they create volatility. But yes, the current prices do have a meaning. You can sell wheat at the current price. You can sell they've got a forward contract, and you can sell wheat or buy wheat at those prices. So yes, they're real, but they don't mean as much as they normally do because of the increased volatility.
With that in mind, how's the 2020 market shaping up?
Not very good. It looks like we're going to have continued relatively low prices. And I mean around $4.50 to $5 for Oklahoma wheat, somewhere in that vicinity. We're looking at a record world crop right now. You've got now Russia slightly, they lowered their production a little bit a couple weeks ago, and then they raised it up. So a lot of uncertainty there. Ukraine's supposed to be lower, but you've got Australia coming on the market right now. First crop in probably 4 years. They're coming in, and so I think it's going to keep prices relatively low.
We need something positive to end on. Anything optimistic you can tell us?
Well, in the last week or so, our basis has increased. A higher basis for our forward contracts, higher for current prices. That means there's demand for our 2020 harvested wheat, and I think that's good news. Give me test weight, give me protein, and we're going to have, given conditions, a relatively good price.
Let's hope for that. Kim, thanks a lot. We'll see you next week.
We're here at the Perkins Research Station at the Bermuda Research Plots. And Alex, we've had a lot of rain recently. So how's that impacted the Bermuda crop around the state?
So yeah, this bunch of rain that we get, rainy days that we get in the past, really make it difficult to control weeds during this season. Here, as you can see in Perkins, we can see that's not very nice how we have it right now, but to be honest, I'm happy. We could apply some pre-emerging time, so seedlings of weeds didn't come. And also, we apply in the right time some post-emergent herbicides, and you could knock down some of the weeds that were up. But I have seen around that producers had a hard time to control weeds, and now lots of weeds are coming up. At the top of that, what's happening right now is Bermuda grass is breaking dormants, where we are here in Perkins, that I would say north central Oklahoma, and the Bermuda grass are already coming up. If it's coming up right now here, I imagine that in the south the Bermuda grass already started to green up even a week ago. And I would say right now control weeds is not the best approach if you think about the herbicides. Green up is a very delicate time for Bermuda grass. Even if you try to apply selective post-emergent herbicide, that still can damage your Bermuda grass. So you can control with a herbicides application. After that, you see that your Bermuda grass completely green up, you see your field completely green from Bermuda grass, and that it gets at least 2 inches of growth.
So right now, what should producers be thinking about doing to help manage their Bermuda crop?
So right now, with the green up coming up, and if you have lots of weeds that you could not control, I would say that the best approach if your pasture is not too wet is go there and mow that excess of weed. Mow in a way that you are getting all that excess of weed out, but not touching the Bermuda grass new growth. Now we need to think about fertilization. And right now is the right time for P and K fertilization. I would say wait nitrogen fertilization when all the green up is done and you have about 3 inches of growth. That's when the roots are active to uptake all the nitrogen in the soil. Talking about phosphorus and potassium, the best approach is to have a soil analysis from your pasture and apply accordingly with that soil analysis.
All right, thanks, Alex. If you'd like some more information on herbicide application and fertilizer application, go to our website, sunup.okstate.edu.
That'll do it for us this week. Remember, you can find us anytime on our website, sunup.okstate.edu, and also follow us on YouTube and social media. I'm Lyndall Stout. Be safe and be well, and we'll see you next time at SUNUP.